I mean, that really seems to be if you aren't exhausted, you aren't doing enough. Right. I mean, that really seems to be the modern mantra for success, doesn't it? We basically measure goodness by sweat.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like we need that physical proof.
Yeah. Like if you want to build a house, you need to see the physical labor. You hear the hammers, you point to the blueprints, and someone says, look at all that hard work.
Exactly. We have this really deeply ingrained belief that visible effort like sweat equity, basically just white knuckling your way through a problem, is the only undeniable proof that you are actually committed.
Right.
Because it creates a very tangible metric for us. I mean, we want progress to be visible. And, the easiest way to categorize progress is by tallying up the sheer amount of human energy we expend on any given day.
Yeah, like if your muscles ache or your brain is just totally fried by 5 p.m., society basically tells you that you've done something worthwhile.
Right, you've earned your rest.
But what if, and this is where it gets crazy, what if the harder you try to do the right thing, the further away you actually get from your goal?
That is the big question.
It is. And today's deep dive takes us into a landscape of human action that completely flips our definition of effort upside down.
Yeah, it really does.
We're looking at the writings of Louisa Picaretta. She was a 20th century mystic, and she wrote extensively on the inner life, specifically exploring this concept known as the divine will.
Mm-hmm.
And the core of her philosophy suggests that trying incredibly hard to do good, like using all your willpower, all your discipline, might actually be the primary source of your deepest anxiety.
Yeah, and the proposition she puts forward changes the entire architecture of how we understand human purpose.
Right.
It asks us to consider a monumental shift in prepositions, really. Like, instead of trying to work for a higher power or, a higher moral good, what happens when you step aside and let that power work in you?
Wow, okay. But to really grasp the mechanics of that shift, I think we have to look at the baseline of how we currently operate, right?
Definitely.
Because Picaretta's framework maps out the progression of the spiritual or moral life, and she identifies this sort of starting line where almost everyone begins. And it's the mindset of the servant working for a master.
Right, the servant dynamic. And that's fundamental to how we structure almost all of our obligations.
Yeah.
Think about the nature of that relationship for a second. A servant and a master are two entirely separate entities.
Right, completely separate.
Separated by a gap of authority. The master issues a command or sets an expectation, and the servant receives it. Then the servant turns around, walks away from the master, and relies entirely on their own internal steam to execute that task.
Right. And the text uses a really specific kind of grounded example for this, which I love. It's translating a manuscript.
Yes, the translation analogy.
So imagine you've been asked to translate a massive, difficult text as an act of service. If you are operating in this servant mindset, you are sitting at the desk, chugging coffee, stressing over the dictionary.
Pushing through writer's block, yeah.
Exactly. You are generating all the kinetic energy required to hit those keys. You are doing it for the master, but you are the engine.
And, while the intention behind that effort is incredibly noble, the mechanism itself is flawed because it is entirely human.
Right.
It relies on your finite reserves of physical and emotional energy. I mean, when you are the sole engine, you are bound by the limits of your own fuel tank.
Which eventually runs out.
Always.
Yeah.
And this is where the concept of the ego first rears its head in her work.
Okay, wait, let me just jump in here, because when we talk about ego here, we aren't talking about arrogance, right? Like, it's not about someone bragging about how great their translation skills are.
Oh, no, far from it.
Yeah.
In this context, the ego is simply the sense of a separate, individualized self that identifies as the primary agent of action. It is the voice that says, I am doing this work. I am generating this effort.
Got it.
Because it is an external relationship. You sitting at the desk over here and the divine expectation floating somewhere over there. You have to constantly build a bridge of exhausting human effort to connect the two.
But here's the problem with that servant mindset, right? It lacks any real inner transformation. It's just transactional. You do the chore, you get the approval.
Exactly.
So naturally, human beings try to fix that emptiness by moving away from just doing tasks to actually trying to change their core identity. They want to upgrade from being a servant to being a disciple.
Yeah, that is the natural evolution of moral development, according to the text. A disciple isn't satisfied with merely executing a checklist of tasks.
Right.
They want to internalize an entire way of life. They observe a perfect model, the master, and they attempt to fundamentally restructure their own character to replicate that model.
Okay, so to put that in modern terms, the servant is like the devoted employee trying to impress the boss, but the disciple is the person who like hires a high performance life coach.
That's a great way to look at it.
You don't just want to do the work, you want to mimic the coach's entire existence, right? You start waking up at 4:30 a.m., you take ice baths, you meticulously track your habits.
You meditate to force yourself to be patient.
Yes. You're actively molding yourself into this predetermined shape of goodness.
Right. It becomes an exercise in an intense behavioral modification.
Yes.
And I mean, on the surface, it looks like a much deeper level of commitment.
Oh, for sure.
The disciple appears vastly more spiritual or morally upright than the servant because their entire lifestyle is curated around these teachings.
But the text argues that this is actually still a trap. The disciple is really just a highly optimized servant.
Exactly. The underlying architecture hasn't changed at all. The individual is still relying exclusively on their own battery power.
Right.
The ego is still completely intact. It is just, put on a more disciplined, pious uniform.
Yeah.
You are still the one white-knuckling your way through the 4:30 a.m. alarm.
Still forcing the patience.
Yeah. The heavy lifting rests entirely on your shoulders.
Which honestly explains the phenomenon of burnout among people who are ostensibly doing everything right.
Oh, completely.
Like people who are relentlessly dedicated to their causes, who are incredibly disciplined in their personal lives, they often hit this wall of absolute spiritual and emotional exhaustion because they are carrying the sheer weight of a moral imperative all by themselves.
Right. Because human shoulders were not designed to carry the infinite.
Wow.
When you try to perfectly replicate a divine model using only finite human energy, the battery will eventually, inevitably, drain to zero. The tension of trying to hold that shape just becomes unbearable.
Okay, so that brings us to the radical alternative Picaretta proposes. If being a dedicated servant drains you, and being a disciplined disciple still leaves you carrying the burden of your own ego, what is left?
Well, the framework points to a peak state of operation.
Right.
It's a complete paradigm shift that she calls living in the divine will.
And this is where the concept of the ego doesn't just get like disciplined or managed, right? It completely dissolves.
Yes, completely.
The text describes this as a state where instead of using your own strength to do the work, you invite the divine to take complete control. Like God uses your human intellect and your human hands to perform the work directly. So going back to that manuscript translation example, instead of straining, instead of tensing up every muscle in your body to figure out the right words, you simply sit back and say, Lord, please translate for me.
Right.
You allow the divine to operate entirely through you.
And, the phrase, please translate for me, sounds incredibly simple. But the mechanics behind it actually dismantle our entire understanding of agency.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back here because this is where the philosophy risks sounding kind of absurd to a modern ear.
Sure, go ahead.
If I am sitting at my keyboard and I completely surrender my will, I'm still the one typing.
Right.
If I don't move my fingers, the keys don't get pressed and the translation just does not happen. How is this not just a psychological trick we play on ourselves? Or worse, just an excuse for complete passivity?
That is such a crucial distinction to make. Surrender, in this philosophical framework, is the exact opposite of passivity.
Okay.
Passivity is sitting in the passenger seat, kicking your feet up, and falling asleep while the car veers off the road.
Right.
Surrender is entirely active, but it changes the nature of what you are. You cease being the engine, and you become a pure, hollow instrument. Think of a flute in the hands of a master musician.
Okay, a flute. Walk me through the physics of that.
Well, the flute does not generate the breath.
Right.
The flute does not compose the melody, nor does it decide the tempo.
Yeah.
But the flute is absolutely fundamentally necessary for the music to manifest in the physical world.
So it's a partnership, but a totally different kind.
Exactly. Without the physical structure of the flute, the keys, the metal, the hollow core, the musician's breath is just silent air.
Ah, okay. So the typing fingers are the keys of the flute.
Exactly. Now, imagine if the flute suddenly developed an ego.
Okay.
Imagine it said, I really want to play this sonata perfectly. I'm going to try incredibly hard to make a beautiful sound. And in its effort to help, the flute clenches up its internal valves. It stiffens. It tries to force the air through. What happens to the music?
The note goes completely flat, or the air gets blocked entirely. By trying too hard, the flute ruins the song.
Yes. that physical clenching, that tightening up, that is the exact sensation of human striving.
Oh, wow.
That is what Picaretta means when she talks about the exhaustion of the servant and the disciple. When we use our ego to force an outcome, we are clenching our internal valves. We are blocking the breath.
So in this peak state of surrender, the typing still happens.
Yes.
The daily chores still happen. You are still showing up to your life.
Ab-
But the source of the action shifts. You offer your intellect, your hands, and your time not as tools that you wield to please a master, but as hollow instruments that you allow the divine to play.
Exactly. The friction disappears when you realize you only need to be the instrument.
That reframes the physical sensation of work completely. Like,
Okay.
the exhaustion we feel isn't from the typing itself, it's from the clenching.
Right.
It's from the ego believing it has to supply both the instrument and the breath.
Mhm.
But making that jump from being the engine to being the instrument requires a massive shift in how we frame our intentions.
Right. Yeah, it's huge.
The text points out that the way we typically ask for help actually betrays our desire to stay in control. It all comes down to the subtle, almost invisible nuances in how we set our daily intentions or how we pray.
Right. Because the language we use internally dictates the reality we experience.
Yeah.
It exposes the deepest assumptions we hold about our relationship with the world around us.
So Picaretta contrasts two very specific phrases. The first one is a very common spiritual sentiment: Lord, live in me. Right.
And on the surface, that sounds like the ultimate goal. It sounds like you are asking for deep connection.
It is the standard operating procedure for the disciple. I mean, it sounds holy, but it is actually a deeply entrenched defense mechanism of the ego.
Because when you say live in me, you are merely inviting a companion. You are asking for a co-pilot. You are basically saying, I have this road trip planned. I have the map. I'm holding the steering wheel. I just want you in the passenger seat to hand me snacks, check the GPS, and keep me company while I do the driving.
That is the perfect analogy. Notice how the hierarchy remains completely untouched in that scenario.
Right.
I am still the primary agent. I am undertaking the endeavor, and I am asking the divine to step into my reality to assist me.
Which means if the car crashes, it's my fault. If we get lost, I failed.
Exactly. The psychological burden of the co-pilot model is massive.
I bet. Neuroscientifically speaking, when you view yourself as the ultimate arbiter of success or failure, your body reacts accordingly. The amygdala perceives the potential for failure as a literal threat to your survival.
Wow, so cortisol flows.
Right. The stress response remains constantly engaged because the outcome of the journey rests squarely on your driving skills. Even with the divine in the passenger seat, you are still white-knuckling the steering wheel.
Okay, then the text offers the alternative, the language of the third level. Instead of saying, Lord, live in me, the intention shifts to, may the divine will live in me.
Yeah. The difference between inviting a companion and asking for a replacement.
It sounds so subtle, just swapping a few words, but you are literally asking the divine source of life to completely replace your own will. You're asking to be hollowed out.
Because asking for your will to be replaced is the ultimate act of vulnerability.
Right.
It requires the total cessation of the ego. A companion works alongside your existing ambitions, but a replacement demands that you step entirely off the throne of your own life.
Wow.
It is the conscious decision to void your personal metrics for success. You have to say, my desires, my anxieties about the future, my need to be recognized as the one doing the good work, I am relinquishing all of it to make room for something else to operate the machinery.
And that psychological release leads directly to the core contrast the text makes, right? The profound difference between pressure and peace.
Exactly.
When we are trapped in the mindset of when we are the servant or the disciple grinding away, we are guaranteed to feel pressure.
Because the entire system is built on a transactional foundation. The logic dictates that your worth is directly correlated to your output.
Right.
If the translation is sloppy, you are a bad servant. If you sleep through your 4:30 a.m. alarm, you are a failing disciple. The pressure is a feature, not a bug, of that operating system.
But when we move to living it, when the will is replaced and we become that hollow instrument, the text claims the result is pure peace and happiness. And the reasoning is wonderfully subversive because it is actually God who is acting.
Right. The burden of the outcome is completely severed from human responsibility.
That's amazing.
If you are truly just the flute, you don't agonize over how the audience receives the song. That is the musician's concern. Your only responsibility is to remain open and unblocked.
This absolutely throws out the modern scoreboard. We judge every aspect of our lives by volume. You know, how many emails did I clear out of my inbox? How many miles did I run? How many people did I manage to help today?
Right.
We literally have spreadsheets for our morality. But this philosophy states the volume of work achieved is entirely irrelevant.
It completely dismantles the commodification of goodness. In a system driven by the ego, 1,000 pages translated is objectively better than 1 page translated.
Sure.
But in the framework of the divine will, the metric of volume evaporates. The only goal is the melting away of the personal will into the divine. A single sentence typed in a state of complete peaceful surrender carries infinitely more weight than 1,000 pages typed in a state of anxious white-knuckling dread.
Wow. So let's trace this whole journey back and look at what it means for you, the listener, right now.
Okay.
We started by examining the default mode for most of us, the servant. Working tirelessly for a higher power or a company or a family, using our own finite strength, exhausting ourselves to present a finished product to an external judge.
A life defined by the anxious accumulation of completed tasks.
Right. From there, we looked at the logical next step people take to find meaning, becoming the disciple. We try to internalize the rules, we mimic the habits of a master, we rigorously discipline our behavior, but we realize we're still relying on our own internal battery, still carrying the heavy burden of our own ego, still forcing the air through the instrument.
A life defined by the exhausting maintenance of a moral identity.
And finally, we explored the radical peak of stepping aside entirely, living in the divine will, relinquishing the need to be the engine and accepting the role of the hollow flute. We saw how moving from asking for a co-pilot to asking for a complete replacement of our will fundamentally changes our neurobiology. It shuts down the cortisol, it removes the fear of failure, and allows the divine to operate completely through us.
It is the definitive transition from a life of frantic, fear-based doing to a life of anchored, peaceful being.
What's so striking about this text is its universal applicability. You might be approaching this from a deeply religious perspective, seeking a more profound union with the divine. Or you might be looking at this strictly through the lens of modern psychology, searching for an antidote to the crushing weight of burnout.
Absolutely.
The underlying truth remains exactly the same. The need to release the ego, to let go of the relentless pressure to do it all and be it all solely on your own steam, is a fundamental human necessity.
The refusal to surrender is what is breaking us. We are a culture of tightly clenched instruments wondering why we can't produce any music.
Right. Think back to that image we started with. The hammers, the physical labor, the sweat equity we so desperately want to display to prove our worth. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor, convinced that our stress is the price of admission for being a good person. But based on the mechanics of surrender we've unpacked today, I want to leave you with a different kind of metric to evaluate your life.
Yeah.
If true, enduring peace actually comes from stepping completely out of your own way, from allowing your personal will to dissolve rather than asserting it louder. What is one area in your life right now where your intense, stressful, white-knuckling effort is actually the very thing blocking you from finding peace?
It really challenges everything we are taught. Sometimes the most profound work we will ever do requires us to finally stop working.
Keep diving deep.